The late October sky over the Redstone Plains darkened ominously. The rolling hills of John Parker's 200-acre Texas ranch bracing for a storm that had already forced travelers off the highway. The lake shimmering faintly in the distance, its surface rippling with a rising wind, the wildflowers along the pasture's edge trembling in vibrant hues of yellow and purple, their delicate petals battered but enduring against the vast expanse of the untamed land. At 54, John had weathered countless storms on this ranch, each one a test of resilience. The ancient oaks dotting the landscape creaking under the gusts, their gnarled branches heavy with the weight of history, the air thick with the scent of rain and cedar, the faint lowing of cattle blending with the distant rumble of thunder, the plains stretching wide and unbroken, their roots deep in the Texas soil. After Ethan's healing journey with Shadow, John had hoped for a quiet season, but the burn scar on his forearm throbbed with a dull ache as he secured the barn doors. The emptiness in his life, the questions about his past, fading when he could be of service to others, the wildflowers enduring despite the storms that had come before. John woke before dawn, as he had every day for the past 30 years, the morning ritual unchanged, coffee brewed in the same pot his late wife, Laura, had picked out before cancer took her 8 years ago. The farmhouse creaking with familiar sounds, but feeling too big for just one person, the local weather report warning of a severe storm approaching. John glancing at the empty chairs around his kitchen table. Holidays the hardest since Ethan and the crew had returned to their routines after the harvest festival. The lake glowing silver in the distance, its calm a stark contrast to the tension knotting his gut. Another day, John said to himself, pulling on his work boots. The ranch keeping him busy, 60 acres of grazing land, a small herd of cattle, and enough chores to fill the daylight hours, the work good for him, leaving little time for dwelling on questions that had followed him since childhood. John having been adopted at age 4. His adoptive parents, good people who loved him deeply, telling him little about his birth family, just that his mother had been young and unable to care for him, no name, no history, no connections to that earlier life. The wildflowers along the barn's edge trembling in the morning light, the plains pulsing with the weight of history, their roots deep in the Texas soil. By afternoon, the sky turned a menacing gray, wind bending the oaks along the property line, John hurrying back to the house as the first heavy raindrops fell, the storm intensifying through the evening, rain lashing against the windows while thunder rolled across the plains. John sitting in the living room, a photo album open on his lap. Faded pictures of his adoptive parents, of Laura, of Ethan as a child, the sudden knock startling him, John not expecting visitors, especially in this weather, opening the front door to find 3 people huddled on his porch, drenched and shivering. Our car slid off the road about a mile back, a woman explained. We saw your lights. The lake glowing silver in the distance, its calm a beacon of the peace John fought for. Come in, John said, stepping aside. The highway gets dangerous in storms like this. The 3 strangers introducing themselves as the Carters, a middle-aged couple and their adult son, traveling to a family reunion when the storm caught them. I can drive you to town tomorrow when it clears, John offered. Tonight, you're welcome to stay here, Mrs. Carter looking relieved. We're grateful. Most people wouldn't open their door to strangers these days, John smiling. My father taught me never to turn away someone in need. And there's plenty of room here. Been too empty for too long anyway. The wildflowers along the porch trembling in the rain, the plains stretching wide and unbroken, their roots deep in the Texas soil. John brought towels for his unexpected guests, stoking the fireplace, the old farmhouse having plenty of spare rooms since Ethan moved to a nearby cabin as the storm raged outside. John heating soup and making sandwiches in the kitchen. Can I help with anything? Mrs. Carter asked, joining him. No need. I'm used to taking care of things myself, John replied. Though company is nice for a change. Mr. Carter examining the ranch photos on the wall. This land been in your family long? John nodding. My adoptive father bought it in the 50s. I took over when he got too old to manage it. Been here most of my life now, noticing the son, Daniel, still shivering despite the warm fire. The young man's face pale. You all right there? John asked, Mrs. Carter touching her son's forehead. He's been fighting a cold for days now. John nodding. I have some medicine upstairs. And extra blankets. The lake shimmering faintly beyond the ridge, its surface a mirror of the hope that endured. As the evening progressed, John found himself sharing stories he rarely told. About Laura and their life together, about Ethan and his recent healing with Shadow, about growing up on this ranch with parents who chose him. I was 4 when they adopted me, John explained. Don't remember much before that, just fragments, really. Daniel, looking better after medicine and food, asking, You never looked for your birth family? John shaking his head. My adoptive parents were my real family in all the ways that mattered. Still, there are times I wonder where I came from, who I might look like. The wildflowers along the windows, trembling in the storm. The plains pulsing with the weight of survival, their roots deep in the Texas soil. The conversation shifted when a particularly loud thunder crack shook the windows, more headlights appearing on the rural road, slowing near John's long driveway. Looks like more folks having trouble with the storm, John said, rising from his chair. I better see if they need help. Minutes later returning with 2 more stranded travelers. A middle-aged man in a sheriff's uniform and his teenage daughter. This is Sheriff Mark Daniels and his daughter, Lily, John introduced, their car hydroplaned near the bridge. Sheriff Daniels nodding gratefully. We were heading back for my mother's 80th birthday. Didn't expect the storm to hit so fast. John smiling. You're both welcome here. I've got coffee brewing and plenty of food. The lake glowing silver in the distance. It's come a testament to the peace John had won. As everyone settled in the living room, John noticed Sheriff Daniels studying him with an odd expression. The man seeming distracted, glancing repeatedly at John when he thought no one was looking. Something wrong? John finally asked. Sheriff Daniels shaking his head quickly. No, sorry. Just remind me of someone. John having heard that before, with no knowledge of his birth family. Always wondering if he passed relatives on the street without knowing. If somewhere out there someone shared his eyes, his smile, his mannerisms, the wildflowers along the porch trembling in the rain. The plains stretching wide and unbroken, their roots deep in the Texas soil. As the night deepened, the storm showing no signs of letting up, John distributed blankets and pillows to his guests. The Carter family settling in the guest room upstairs, while Sheriff Daniels and Lily took the living room couch and recliner. John moving about the house, checking windows, making sure everyone was comfortable, returning to the kitchen to make more coffee, finding Sheriff Daniels standing by the refrigerator, staring at a photo held by a magnet. That's my grandson. Ethan, John explained, taken about a year ago at the Harvest Festival. Sheriff Daniels nodding slowly. You said earlier you were adopted. Do you mind if I ask where? John measuring coffee grounds. Cedar Hollow Children's Home. It closed down years ago. Why do you ask? Sheriff Daniels hesitating. Just curious. Law enforcement gets you thinking about connections sometimes. John noticing the man's hand moving to his back pocket, retrieving his wallet. Something about the gesture making John's heart beat faster. I need to show you something, Sheriff Daniels said. It might seem strange. Opening his wallet, removing a worn photo, placing it carefully on the kitchen table, the lake shimmering faintly beyond the ridge. Its surface a mirror of the hope that endured. John leaned closer, the image showing a young couple, perhaps in their early 20s, holding a toddler. That's my older brother, James, and his wife, Ellen, Sheriff Daniels explained, and their son, Thomas. This picture was taken about 50 years ago. John picking up the photo, a strange feeling washing over him, the child having his same cowlick, the same slightly crooked smile. They died in a car accident when Thomas was 3, Sheriff Daniels continued. My mother tried to get custody, but the system moved quickly back then. By the time we located him, he'd been placed with a family. The adoption was closed. We never found out where he went. John's hands trembling slightly. What was their last name? Your brother and his wife. Sheriff Daniels meeting his gaze. Parker, James and Ellen Parker. John sitting down slowly. His adoptive parents having kept his original surname, telling him it was to honor his birth family, a common name he'd never thought much about. Where were they? When did the accident happen? Asking, his voice barely above a whisper. October 1974. Sheriff Daniels replying. John walking to a drawer, pulling out a small wooden box. Inside his adoption certificate, yellowed with age. Date of placement, December 1974. The wildflowers along the windows trembling in the storm, the plains pulsing with the weight of history, their roots deep in the Texas soil. I have my father's eyes, John said softly. That's what my adoptive mother always told me, but she never said which father. Sheriff Daniels moving closer, studying John's face with new intensity. You have the Parker nose too, and that chin, that's my mother's chin. The kitchen falling silent except for the sound of rain against the windows. John staring at the photo. Memories stirring at the edges of his mind. A woman's laugh. A man's hands lifting him high. The smell of a particular aftershave. I've been a sheriff for 25 years, Daniel said. Used to searching for people, making connections. Never thought I'd find my nephew by accident in a storm. John's hands gripping the edge of the kitchen table. 50 years of questions rushing through his mind. The room seeming to spin slightly as he tried to process what Sheriff Daniels was saying. I need some air. Moving toward the back porch despite the storm. Sheriff Daniels following, keeping a respectful distance. Rain pattering on the porch roof as John leaned against the railing. Lightning briefly illuminating the fields beyond. The lake glowing silver in the distance. Its calm a beacon of the peace John fought for. I understand this is a shock, Daniels said. Take your time. John taking several deep breaths. All these years, I thought they were just gone. No family at all, Sheriff Daniels nodding. My mother never stopped wondering about you. She's still alive, 80 years old now, sharp as ever, John's voice trembling. Your mother's my grandmother. The words feeling strange in his mouth. Daniels smiling softly. She has albums full of pictures of James and Ellen, and some of you as a baby if you want to see them someday. John turning to face him. Do I have other relatives? Daniels nodding. I have 2 sisters. They both have kids. You've got cousins scattered across 3 states. A memory surfacing in John's mind. A woman singing, a rocking chair, the scent of cinnamon. Did your brother's wife, Ellen, did she bake? Daniel's eyes widening. All the time. Famous for her cinnamon rolls at family gatherings. John closing his eyes, the fragment of memory becoming clearer. I remember someone rocking me. Singing. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon. Daniel's voice soft. You were only 3 when they died. It's amazing you remember anything. The wildflowers along the porch trembling in the rain. The plains stretching wide and unbroken. Their roots deep in the Texas soil. They stood in silence for a moment, listening to the rain, John thinking about his adoptive parents. How they'd loved him completely. How they'd given him this ranch, this life. My parents, my adoptive parents, were good people, saying they never hid that I was adopted. But they didn't know much about my birth family either, or at least that's what they told me. Daniels replying, the system was different back then. My mother hired a private investigator. But the records were sealed by the time we had any leads. Years had passed. John running a hand through his hair. And now you just happened to get stranded at my ranch during a storm. Daniel smiling. Some might call it fate. Or just dumb luck. The bridge was flooded. Yours was the only house with lights for miles. Lily appearing at the door, concerned. Dad, is everything okay? Daniel's turning to his daughter. Lily, come here. There's someone you should meet properly. Stepping onto the porch, looking confused. This is John Parker, Daniels said. He's your cousin, my brother James' son. Lily's eyes widening. The one from the stories, the one Grandma talks about? John feeling a tightness in his chest. All these years. Someone had been telling stories about him, remembering him, looking for him. I'd like to hear those stories sometime, saying quietly, the lake glowing silver in the distance. It's come a testament to the peace John had won. By morning, the storm had passed, sunlight streaming through the kitchen windows as John prepared breakfast for everyone. The Carters gathering their belongings, grateful for the shelter, but eager to continue their journey. "I can't thank you enough," Mrs. Carter said, accepting a thermos of coffee for the road. John smiling. "It was my pleasure. Safe travels." The conversation flowing easily now, the initial shock giving way to curiosity and cautious connection. "You have his laugh," Sheriff Daniels said. "Watching John flip pancakes, my brother James, that exact same laugh." John smiling. "Tell me more about him." "My parents," Daniels nodding. "James was a high school history teacher, smart, patient. Ellen was an artist, painted landscapes mostly. They were saving to buy a small ranch, actually not unlike this one, the Carter family joining them. Sensing the changed atmosphere, but not wanting to intrude, Lily showing John pictures on her phone of his grandmother, his aunts, cousins he'd never known existed. "I should call Ethan. He needs to know about this, too." The wildflowers along the fields glistening with raindrops in the morning light, the plains stretching wide and unbroken, their roots deep in the Texas soil. After breakfast, as the Carters prepared to leave, Mrs. Carter squeezed John's hand. "Sometimes the universe puts us exactly where we need to be." Once they had gone, John and Sheriff Daniels sitting on the front porch, the fields sparkling in the sunlight. "I have a box in the attic," John said. "Things my adoptive parents kept for me. Maybe there's more information there." Climbing the narrow stairs to the attic, dust motes dancing in the sunbeams as John pulled out an old cardboard box. Inside, baby clothes, a small blanket, and a sealed envelope he'd never noticed before. To John, "When you're ready," reading the handwriting he recognized as his adoptive mother's. With trembling fingers, opening it, inside a letter and a faded photograph of a young couple holding an infant. "Dear John," reading aloud, "if you're reading this, you're finally searching for answers about your birth family. We wanted to tell you more, but worried it might confuse you as a child. We did know your parents' names. The social worker told us about the accident. She gave us this picture and said it should be yours when you were old enough to understand." John pausing, emotion tightening his throat. "We promised to tell you stories about them, to keep their memory alive. I hope we did that well enough. They loved you very much. That was clear from everything we learned. We loved you too. From the moment we saw you. You were always our son. Even as you were theirs first." Sheriff Daniels wiping his eyes. "They sound like good people." John nodding softly. "They were the best." The lake shimmering faintly beyond the ridge, its surface a mirror of the hope that endured. 2 weeks later, John stood nervously on the porch of a small house 3 counties away. Ethan having driven up from his cabin to join him for this moment. At his side, Sheriff Daniels. "Mark," as John now called him, smiling, "ready?" John nodding, Mark knocking on the door when it opened. An elderly woman with familiar eyes standing before them. Looking at John, her hand moving to cover her mouth. "Thomas," whispering, John smiling gently. "I go by John now. But yes, I'm James and Ellen's son." Reaching out with trembling hand to touch his face. "I never stopped looking for you." John's voice soft. "I know. And now I found my way home." Stepping inside. John feeling something settle within him, the emptiness that had followed him all his life finally having a name, a shape, a history. He wasn't just John Parker, the rancher who helped strangers. He was Thomas John Parker, part of a family that had been searching for him all along, the wildflowers along the house's edge blooming anew, their colors vibrant in the Texas morning, the plains stretching wide and unbroken, their roots deep in the Texas soil. The crew gathered in the yard, coffee steaming in mugs, the air thick with the scent of roasted beans and the faint tang of hay that clung to their clothes. Ethan slouched in a chair, his face steady, trust forged in the family's fire. The map spread wide across the table, the southern road marked in blue ink, a testament to the night's revelation, the lantern light casting long shadows over their weary faces. The lake glowing gold outside as the last rays of dusk faded, the plains stretching wide and unbroken, wildflowers battered but enduring, their roots deep in the Texas soil. "Storm spoke," Frank said, leaning back, his pistol gleaming on his hip, his voice gravelly but sure. "You answered. Grayson won't like this." Mary Ellen poured coffee, her hand firm, her voice edged with steel. Family's a sign. Your roots are a wall, John. We'll stand. Jake grinned, his fists unclenching, dust still smudged on his face. You found Ethan, too. He's proud now. Sarah nodded from the corner, her phone glowing with Elena's last update. Her voice resolute. Story's out. Pass alive. We'll keep it safe. Matt tapped his laptop, fingers pausing as he met John's gaze, his tone sharp. Grayson's moving. Saw the reunion. I'll dig. Won't stop till we know. Tom stood by the door, lantern dimming, his broad frame a silent pillar. His voice low but firm. I'll watch the ridge. Plains are calm, but eyes ain't. John met Ethan's gaze across the table, the boy's eyes steady despite the weight of the day. His hands still steady from the bond, and John's voice cut through the room like steel tempered in fire. You saw today. Family's roots like a Parker. That's good. Keep it up, Ethan. The past's just the start. We've got more coming. Ethan swallowed hard, nodding slow, his voice quiet but raw. I will, Dad, swear it. No more wondering. The room fell silent. The lake glowing silver outside as the night deepened. The plains stretching wide and unbroken. Wildflowers battered but enduring, their roots deep in the Texas soil. John rose, rifle close, stepping onto the porch where the air smelled of earth and renewal. His eyes scanning the ridge where the storm had brought truth, the memory of his family a warm weight on his heart. The legacy of his past a bond he'd carry until the end. Across the horizon, a light blinking, binoculars catching the starlight, then vanishing into the trees, a shadow still breathing in the darkness. A reminder that the fight was far from over, the wildflowers along the plain's edge blooming anew, their colors vibrant in the Texas night, the lake glowing silver in the distance. Its calm a testament to the peace John had won, but the storm on the horizon a promise of battles yet to come.